Werner Pinzner seemed to be down on his luck from the beginning, as after he dropped out of school, he floated from job to job, ultimately being sentenced to 10 years in prison for his part in an armed robbery that resulted in the death of the store manager. While behind bars, he was able to establish connections with multiple members of Germany's seedy red light district, as he desired to live the lifestyle of a pimp. Even while he was on day release from prison, he became a contract killer, eliminating anyone for the right price, as this was something he continued to do after he was officially released. When German police finally cracked down on organized crime, Werner was quickly named as a suspect in multiple murders, but he was ready to talk. On July 29, 1986, he was set to be interviewed at the Hamburg police headquarters, but the cops didn't know that there was a surprise in store for them. Welcome to history's biggest villains. Werner was born on April 27, 1947 in Branfield, Germany as the son of a radio mechanic and a grocery store manager. After dropping out of high school, he got his sea legs with the International Christian Maritime Association. He drifted around for the next few years, getting spot work as a truck driver and also getting denied entry into the German armed forces due to his criminal record. After he had a daughter in 1971, Werner worked as a scaffolder, a tiler, and a butcher. However, in August 1975, he was involved in an armed robbery at a supermarket, one in which the store manager was shot and killed. Werner was arrested soon afterwards and sentenced to 10 years in prison, but not before marrying his second wife, Jetta. During his time inside, Werner established connections with the German underworld, mainly revolving around the red light district, especially since he wanted to get into the prostitution business. During his last year of incarceration at the Veerland Correctional Facility, the open prison policy meant that he could freely smuggle cocaine and heroin into the facility. Each inmate also got their own locker that wasn't searched, and in his, Werner kept a .38 caliber revolver that he bought while he was in prison. In June 1984, while still on day release, Werner took part in a robbery with two other accomplices. In St. Pauli at this time, the pimps in Hamburg operated several brothels in the red light districts, but prostitution declined in the 80s due to the world's newfound awareness of AIDS. So in order to make up lost profits, the pimps intensified their exploitation of their workers. Drug trafficking also picked up, as well as arms dealing and fencing, or the act of receiving stolen goods and reselling them. Obviously, with the increase of criminal activity, disputes amongst the criminals led to violent turf wars. The two main groups of pimps fighting for power in St. Pauli were the more established GmbH gang and the rising Nutella gang. Both of these groups used Hell's Angels as debt collectors. One of the top emerging brothel owners in Hamburg was Peter Neusser, better known as Werner Peter. He joined forces with two other brothel owners, Armin Hokoff and Siegfried Traeger. They wanted to expand their influence and eliminate the competition in the drug and prostitution trades, so they hired Werner as a hitman, who by this time had a well-documented cocaine habit. So in July 1984, even while he was still on day release, Peter called on Werner to do a job for him. Yehuda Arzi, also known as Hans Mueller, was a former brothel owner and used his mother's past as a brothel owner to blackmail his ex-wife and daughter. He also ran off without paying for cocaine, leaving her and several associates behind in their Kiel apartment. Peter was the middleman for the job, as Arzi's ex-wife and daughter first asked that Werner cut off one of his fingers to scare him, but then they asked him to just kill him. For a fee of 40,000 Deutschmarks, Werner and Armin traveled to Yehuda's apartment on July 7th, where he was shot and killed. Although Arzi's ex-wife and daughter were identified as suspects, the charges against them were dropped due to a lack of evidence. After committing his first hired hit, Werner returned to prison and put the murder weapon back in his locker, as he was officially released a few weeks later. Peter Fehlmeyer, or Bayern Peter, was a part owner of the brothels Hammerdeich and MC Club. He had become a risk to his business partners due to his excessive cocaine consumption and erratic behavior. This business partner reached out to Werner Peter and offered him a stake of Fehlmeyer's, so Werner was called into action, being promised 15,000 Deutschmarks from each of the new partners and a share in the brothel. On September 12th, he and an accomplice lured Fehlmeyer to a garage complex in Herzkamp under the pretense of a drug deal, and he was killed with a bullet to the head. While Werner was paid for the murder, he didn't receive a share of the brothel, being commissioned as a collector for the Hammerdeich. Werner Peter had a partner at another one of his brothels named Dietmar Traud, but he had become a burden due to his cocaine addiction. He also wanted to relinquish his share in the brothel and deal drugs independently, asking for a compensation payment of 100,000 Deutschmarks. In November, Dietmar went to Munich to check on a prostitute, but little did he know that he was being followed by Werner and an accomplice. The two men stopped at a brothel in Heilbronn to obtain an alibi. Then they went to Munich. Just like with Fehlmeyer, the fake drug deal ploy worked again, so the three men traveled to the Hohenbrunn forest in a rental car. Werner, the driver, faked a car breakdown, and once Traub exited the vehicle, he was shot and killed. Waldemar Dahmer ran two brothels that were in direct competition with Werner Peter. Right before Easter 1985, Dahmer had two of his thugs beat up Peter in one of his brothels. Now publicly humiliated, Peter hired Werner and another accomplice to eliminate Dahmer and the two guys who beat him up for 60,000 Deutschmarks. On Easter Monday, the two killers arrived at Dahmer's house in Schlenzen and were allowed inside. The two thugs weren't there, but Waldemar and his manager Ralph Kuhn were there, and they both were shot dead. While all this was going on, there were also allegations that some high-ranking police officers were working with pimps, so an investigation group called Department 65 was formed, as this was Germany's first attempt at combating organized crime. The ballistic evidence at all the crime scenes uncovered the same .38 caliber projectile, but the rifling of the bullet was unique. Due to this fact, and also that most of the victims were connected to pimps, these murders were identified as a series by a common perpetrator. They started interviewing witnesses, and after two prostitutes made statements, Werner Peter, and another accomplice were arrested on April 15, 1986, as police also found the murder weapon on the scene. Although the three men were only accused of the murder of Peter Fillmeyer, Werner immediately demanded to speak with the private investigator, Wolfgang Beastry. In the first interrogation, he testified that he had killed 8 people. At a later date, this number rose to 11 as he was ready to testify in court under the condition that he could spend 2 days with his wife Jetta uninterrupted. Werner would provide information on 5 murders and then speak about the criminal aspects of the red light district. He said his motives for the crimes stemmed from the desire to be a pimp, but he was feared as a hitman and wasn't accepted into the fold. After Werner spoke with the police, an apparent bounty of 300,000 Deutschmarks was put on his head. Obviously, an arrest of this magnitude caused a media frenzy, as one reporter paid 35,000 Deutschmarks for exclusive rights access to Werner, his wife, and his lawyer, then sold it to a magazine for 50,000 Deutschmarks. One journalist obtained private pictures and notes of his after neighbors went through his attic, an area that hadn't even been searched by police. Another newspaper published private letters that Werner sent to his wife, and when one publication didn't have exclusive information, they just made up a headline trashing his lawyer. But while the media was speculating, Werner was planning. This was a make-or-break case for his lawyer, who herself was dealing with marital problems, so she was drawn to the complicated relationship of Werner and Jetta. Jetta didn't have too much going on upstairs, and she was completely devoted to Werner. As an excerpt from her letters read, "Don't be angry with me. I don't see through it. My head and my non-existent intelligence. I don't understand it." But Jetta was willing to die for her husband, saying, "Mucky, I wish so much that we could hold each other in our arms and take off very gently, each feeling the love of the other." Since the lawyer, later identified as Isolde Oschle Misfield, had already been smuggling drugs and letters into the prison for Werner, she was now open for blackmail. So when he asked her to get a gun, she did, even showing Jetta how to smuggle it in her panties. Werner was said to be questioned at the Hamburg police headquarters on July 29, 1986. Jetta wore a wide skirt to conceal the weapon, as when her and Isolde went into the bathroom together, they transferred the weapon into her handbag, allowing Werner to easily access it. Along with those three, 2 officers, a typist, and Prosecutor Beastry were also in the room. As soon as the interrogation began, Werner surprised everyone with the words, "Gentlemen, this is a hostage situation." He then pulled the gun out and shot Beastry in the head, as the other officers ran out of the door to sound the alarm. However, the typist was stuck in the room with them. As ambulances and helicopters rushed to the scene, Werner barricaded himself in the room and called his daughter, telling her goodbye, saying, "Birgit, I love you." He then gave Isolde his watch as an heirloom to Birgit. Jetta then knelt down in front of Werner and opened her mouth as he shot her and then turned the gun on himself. Beastry was taken to the hospital, but he died the next day. All in all, Werner was responsible for the deaths of 13 people. The aftermath of this incident was intense, as security concerns at Hamburg prisons were called into question, considering that Werner had traces of cocaine in his body, as well as puncture marks, while evidence of heroin use was also found in his cell. As you would probably expect, charges were brought against Isolde and 3 of her clients. At the trial, an expert testified that she had become so entangled in the case due to severe developmental disorders in her childhood and adolescence that she was no longer able to free herself from it. She was eventually charged as an accessory to murder and sentenced to 6.5 years in prison, with her law license being suspended for 5 years. Callie Svensson, Reinhard Klemm, and Holger Sass were all sentenced to 45 months for procuring the gun used in the murder-suicide. Werner Peter, Armin Hokoff, and Siegfried Traeger all received life sentences. Thank you guys. I really appreciate y'all for the support. Wow, this story was just crazy. This was just wild. To me, it just seems like he just wanted to be a pimp so bad. He was willing to do anything just to get in their graces. The fact that he just continued to be a contract killer over and over again. I think he knew if he went to prison, he was going to get killed because he was already talking to him. Like, you're already talking to the cops. And the fact that she just knelt down and just let him shoot her, her mind was all the way gone. Same with the lawyer. Like, what are you doing as a lawyer? Like, why are you trying to smuggle a gun into the interrogation room? Something tells me you did it before. That you already knew how to show Jetta how to do it. You were doing that before. So I don't even trust your law expertise. I don't even trust that at this point. Because you already showed her how to smuggle a gun. But this case was wild. Thank you guys for the support. I really appreciate y'all. Leave a like. Hit the subscribe button to the channel. Turn on my post notifications if you haven't already. Thank you. Please be safe. I'm out. Peace.